The Black Hills are a unique landscape, providing a wonderful playground for visitors and residents alike. But we have a responsibility to be stewards of this land, making sure this forest thrives for generations to come.
A lot of people know, but maybe not all, that the Black Hills name actually came from Native Americans and referred to how the forest looked when viewed from a distance. It was black and dark on the horizon. And the Black Hills is relatively small and isolated. We're not connected to any other forests. You look around us on a map, and there's not much else but plains and crops around us. I can speak for everyone in saying we all enjoy the forest. We all enjoy the Black Hills, and whether we get out and enjoy it personally or just enjoy knowing that it's there. We can see it on the way to work in the morning or on the way home. We know that the Black Hills is here. We know that it's green and doing well.
They do actually count the trees in the Black Hills.
Really?
There's over 600 million trees in the Black Hills.
The Black Hills are so special to many different people and many different cultures in so many ways. And of course, we look back to that really began with the Native Americans on the landscape and the special meaning for the Black Hills to them. Today, for a lot of folks living in the Black Hills, it's special for reasons that they make it.
It's a great thing when you talk about all kinds of different health, mental health, your physical health. Being outside and enjoying the outdoors, enjoying the forest is good for everybody.
There's something so good for us as human beings just being out in nature. I think it's something that all of us wish we did more and probably should take more time to, even if it's just sitting and enjoying it or exploring, whatever it may be. It's something that we, A, want to keep beautiful for ourselves and for our community, but B, I think it's something we all should take advantage of more.
We have a great playground out here that people can hike in. They can take their off-highway vehicles out. They can horseback ride. We have beautiful reservoirs where they can swim and fish and go boating and kayaking and canoeing. The number of recreational activities are basically only limited by your imagination.
If you're driving around in the Black Hills and you look out to the left or to the right and you see a forested hillside with a diverse number of trees, birch trees, aspen trees, spruce trees, ponderosa pine trees, that's a healthy forest. How do we get that?
You might think leaving the forest untouched is the best way to protect it. But it takes a coordinated effort between government agencies and private industry, such as timber companies, to keep these beautiful hills green. Timber companies utilize several practices to manage our forests, from cutting mature trees in commercial harvests to thinning younger ones that don't have the potential to fully grow.
We're harvesting an overstory removal, and the goal of an overstory removal is to take out the mature overstory that has been thinned over the years so that the next generation can take its place and continue to grow.
Sometimes there's a perception that the different businesses and agencies that are out harvesting in a forest are destroying the forest. But in reality, without some of what you're doing, that forest wouldn't be as healthy as it is and won't be able to sustain all that we want it to as people that live in it and live near it and enjoy it. And so maintaining and conservation is something that is so important, and you really are making quite a difference by doing what you're doing.
In the Black Hills, the ponderosa pine we have here is a very prolific seeder. And that is, it creates a good crop of seeds about every 3 years. And it sheds those seeds across the forest over the course of the winter. And most of our moisture comes in the springtime, and which is just the perfect time of year for those seedlings to germinate and become established. So you can go out in the forest in certain areas and find just a carpet of seedlings out there. It looks like grass. it actually creates too many seedlings out there. They compete with each other for the limited water and nutrients, and consequently they get kind of spindly. They grow slowly and kind of spindly. And so somebody needs to thin those trees out so that they can grow bigger, faster.
It's a very science-based process. The foresters who work for the forest products companies are resource professionals. They've gone to college, they have college degrees in forestry, and they create science-based prescriptions for the private lands that they manage. Much like the Black Hills National Forest creates science-based prescriptions for the lands that they manage. And the Forest Service has been doing that for a long time, and it's produced forests like we're in here now.
It's important that we maintain a viable forest products industry here in the Black Hills so that we can continue to manage our forest and continue to provide those goods and services that the industry provides. But, just as importantly, we need to continue to manage our forest. And without a forest products industry, it would get very, very expensive.
Forestry is agriculture in the United States of America and also in the state of South Dakota. That's the tie, and very few people understand that at the government level anyway, forestry and agriculture are the same. They're merged. It doesn't have to be an animal, or it doesn't have to be a crop of food crop.
Right.
Baker Timber is out here at Flying V Ranch mulching trees that are too dense to properly grow.
What we're doing here is we've gone through this stand of trees, and you can see there's a few old stumps from when we went through and harvested the merchantable timber out of this timber stand area. And what we've done now, after those merchantable trees have been removed, we're going through and managing the dog hair stand, the regen, smaller diameter trees that are of no merchantable value at this point, this stage in their life. And we're reducing the fire hazard while thinning those trees out to promote the future forest growth. It may look like he's just going through and mowing down all those trees, but in fact he's actually systematically picking out an individual tree to leave. And so he'll continue working around each leave tree to remove the other trees that are encroaching around that tree, so that when he's done with the individual area, just one tree remains at a desired spacing that meets whatever the either Forest Service spec may be or agreed to specification with a landowner.
What are they coming out onto your land and doing, and why is that beneficial for you?
They are, number one and foremost, thinning the timber so that we can have grass underneath the trees. The trees have a tendency to grow so thick that grass cannot grow underneath the trees and cattle cannot graze. So that decreases the amount of pasture that we have available for our cattle.
When we have cattle go through and graze an area, we can manage to change to a different species of grass. So we might have them graze out, a early season, cool season grass, so that we have a more hardy late season grass that grows further into the season. We can use them to kind of knock out some invasive species and things like that. So when you bring those livestock in and they graze the forest along with all of our other wildlife species, it benefits and adds into that overall picture again.
every time it's harvested, it changes a little bit, and you create a lot of diversity in the forest. Even if we look around here, we'll see large trees, we'll see small trees, we'll see medium, and it's that forest diversity that the management really creates.
One of the things that's important is to have this mosaic of different successional stages of timber across the landscape, and especially in the Black Hills where we have the timber in South Dakota. We want old growth stands and we want young growth stands. Those are the successional stages, and throughout. One of the things that's critically important is that sunlight needs to hit the bottom, so the grass can grow. That grass needs sunlight. And with the shading, with the constant shading, the forage for the wildlife never has a chance to really grow.
In a well-managed forest, about every 20 years, you need to thin that canopy out, because as those trees grow, the canopy expands, the tree expands, puts on more wood, sequesters more carbon, and occupies more of the site to the exclusion of anything that's growing underneath. So you thin that out again, that opens up that forest floor and allows that vegetation to thrive underneath.
A healthy forest has open grassy areas and then forested areas. So the open grassy areas are typically feeding, grazing areas for your larger animals, but then also nesting and good cover for some of the smaller animals and birds. But then those forested areas, those clumps adjacent to it, those act as thermal cover and shelter for a lot of species.
The other thing that thinning does is it protects the trees from wildfire. By having good spacing between the trees, there's less chance that a wildfire will get up into the treetops. Fires that burn along the ground are easy to suppress, but the fire intensity when the fire gets into the tops of the trees is, firefighters basically just have to back off until that fire drops to the ground. There's really nothing they can do about a firestorm like that.
In 2002, during the Battle Creek fire, it started west of us, and because Bakers had timbered on the west part of the ranch and thinned the trees at that area, when it got to our fence line, because it had been thinned, there were no trees to jump from treetop to treetop, so the fire dropped to the ground and burned underneath the trees, which was actually beneficial.
How is fire linked with the Black Hills?
Well, the Black Hills specifically is a fire-dependent ecosystem. There's been fire here since before recorded history here. We know that there's been fires change the landscape. The species of trees that are here are fire-dependent. The grasses that we're standing in here are fire-dependent. So it's all basically part of the ecosystem that exists not only in the Black Hills, but here in western South Dakota.
When a fire burns through a ponderosa pine forest, if it's not too intense, that bark tends to flake off. And as those pieces of bark flake off in a fire, it reduces the heat that tree is being exposed to. So it's just nature's way of making ponderosa pine more fire resistant.
A lot of people don't like fire, and it scares them, and the smoke bothers them. They just don't like it. But fire is great for the forest, and it's natural. Before humans came, fire would come through the forest on a regular basis, and with it then, after the fire, it creates great habitat. It rejuvenates the forest. It takes out dead overgrowth and things like that, and then allows new stuff to grow.
Too much fuel is really the problem that we have to deal with here in the Black Hills. And it's what we try to manage ahead of the bad fire seasons. Even when we harvest trees, there are certain parts of the trees that have no marketable value. The limbs, you get down to a 4-inch top and that has no marketable value. So a lot of that ends up either scattered out in the forest or piled into piles. And then during the wintertime, when we have adequate snow cover, we'll go out and we'll burn those piles just to eliminate that fuel load.
Slash piles.
Slash piles, exactly.
Along with prescribed burns, slash piles are essential to protecting our forests. It literally is fighting fire with fire.
Ponderosa pine forest types are adapted to and dependent upon fire. The absence of fire is actually the unnatural state. Every time we put a fire out, it theoretically makes the next one worse, right? Because there's constantly fuels accumulating every season in the forest. In the Black Hills, our fire return interval, meaning how frequently should we see fire in any one spot in the Black Hills, is about 27 years. And you can well imagine that if you've been excluding fire and your surface fuels continue to accumulate, then we're going to be able to burn outside of historically that normal intensity that we would see. And that's why broadcast burning, landscape style broadcast burning, as well as piling of materials and getting it burned up, is critical to what we do for forest management.
One simplistic way of looking at it is either we as the human beings that live here, the people that depend on the forest, depend on our landscape here and our environment, either we manage it or Mother Nature manages it for us. And generally when Mother Nature manages it, they bring her system back into balance. People don't like that at all.
Right.
Wildfires, they're not discerning on where they burn. And in ponderosa pine systems, while they're well adapted to fire, they're only adapted to fire when they're opened up, like where we're sitting here today, and the fire doesn't get up into the canopies and burn through the trees. When you burn up all of the foliage, the needles on a pine tree, it doesn't live anymore, and it doesn't produce seed source anymore, and we don't get a forest back. And there are places in the Black Hills where we've had fires in the past that are still struggling to get forests back. You can see it as you leave Deadwood, the Grizzly Gulch fire there of 2002. We're talking nearly 20 years ago now, and it's very difficult to find a seedling on those slopes because of the intensity that it burned. Other places, we've had a lot of wildfire where the forest has been managed, and the forest is beautiful. These trees like this are well adapted to fire when the forest conditions are right for it, but they has to be right, and that's what we can do.
A long-standing threat to the Black Hills that residents are well aware of is the mountain pine beetle. As we have just seen in the last few years, this tiny insect has the capability to inflict massive damage.
We were in the midst of a mountain pine beetle epidemic. Eventually it took over a third of the Black Hills and evergreen forest and turned it into what we call an everbrown forest. It killed the trees.
When a mountain pine beetle successfully attacks a tree, it releases a pheromone attractant. And that attracts other beetles to attack that tree because mountain pine beetles have to attack a tree in enough numbers that they can kill the tree, because it becomes a battle. Either the tree survives or the beetles survive.
Really?
Yeah, and the beetles have a lot of tricks that they use. They introduce a blue stain fungus into the tree, and that fungus clogs up the water conducting tissues, so it cuts off the water to the tree. And then the beetles will chew the phloem tissue underneath the bark, which is the tissue that moves food through the tree. And so they'll girdle the tree and remove all that food transmitting tissue called the phloem. And then the blue stain fungus will clog up the xylem, which is what moves the water in the tree. And that 1-2 punch will kill the tree within a year. So it's a battle. The tree is trying to force that beetle out it exudes a sap. Basically what it is, it's tree sap that tries to flush that beetle out or drown it and kill it. And but if enough beetles attack the tree, they overwhelm the tree's defenses. And they attract other beetles to that tree by releasing this pheromone. Well, in a forest that has been thinned, you get air circulation within that stand. And that air circulation disrupts that pheromone plume. And so the beetles have a hard time finding which trees have been successfully attacked. This wall here, as a matter of fact, is made out of blue stain pine that was harvested during the last mountain pine beetle epidemic. And the blue stain that you see in here is that fungus that was introduced by the beetle into the tree.
And of course, keeping the forest green it helps out with tourism as well. Folks want to come to the Black Hills because we're still a green forest. So many forests in the region have succumbed to mountain pine beetles and wildfires. It's very difficult to find a forest that's still green like ours.
Over $4 billion annually to the state of South Dakota in tourism dollars, and there were over 14 million out-of-state visitors that came to the Black Hills. That's because of a healthy forest. People from Sioux Falls, Huron, Aberdeen, they need to know about the value of the Black Hills, a healthy Black Hills.
Forest management is easy to understand, but putting it into practice is no small task.
Land management here in western South Dakota, whether it's from the local or private landowner up through larger land holdings, whether it be private companies, timber companies, government agencies that are responsible for land management, cooperation on as far as management of the land and having a concise plan and working together on that is invaluable.
We can't just log. We can't just do, commercial thinning. We can't just do non-commercial thinning. We can't just do prescribed fire. All those tools need to be used in the toolbox to be able to come out with a good product, right? I think that's probably the most important thing that we can think about, is that using all the tools available to us is going to get us a much, much better project.
It's never timber harvest or recreation or tourism. They all go hand in hand.
A lot of the trails that people use are logging trails. When we go into a stand to manage it, we got to get the trees out of there somehow. So there are temporary roads that are put in and skid trails that are used to pull those trees out and to haul the trees out of the woods. And those roads then can become recreational access points and also access for firefighters to go in and put out unwanted wildfires.
The timber industry and all the different agencies that play into this, their purpose is not to tear down the forest. That's the last thing that they want to do.
Other places show what happens without forest management, and you don't have to look very far to see what happens. We can look to our southwest at some of the forests in Wyoming and southern Wyoming and northern Colorado, where last year they had multiple fires, over 100,000 acres, largely burning the entire landscape. They've had mountain pine beetle epidemics that ran unchecked and ran through entire national forests.
So we're not only just helping our own forest, but we're helping the environment as a whole by making sure we manage our forest.
At the end of the day, we all want the same thing for the Black Hills. We want to see it healthy. We want to see it thriving.
We can't take this forest or the impact it has on western South Dakota for granted. For us to keep enjoying it, we need to recognize and appreciate all the work that goes into keeping the Black Hills healthy and sustainable.